thank you for encouraging students to think about the challenges that EU faces in this ever-changing world, and also for outlining Latvia's EU presidency's foreign policy agenda. And as you rightly mentioned, students knew that they will have the opportunity to ask you questions. What we didn't tell them is that they will have the opportunity to do much more than that. Now
don't be shy.
Yeah. So now is the possibility to ask questions and or express yourself. But when you do so, please stand up, identify yourself, and then go ahead.
My name is Aldis Bullis. I'm a PhD student in economics. Thank you for your introduction speech. My question is, could you explain, please, the role of your institution in international economic relations? European Union and Brazil, China, India, and how it looks in comparison with, I think, Trade Commissioner, General Directorate, Trade. How do you share these responsibilities? Thank you, and I wish you a lot of luck in your job. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I will need it. Your question is very interesting because we have spent a lot of time thinking and discussing among ourselves in the Commission how to structure in the best possible way the work. Because, as you probably know, I have responsibility over the overall foreign policy and security policy. I have what some call a double hat. Actually, it's more than double, so it can cause some identity crisis probably over the 5 years. But I am at the same time Vice President of the European Commission and High Representative for Foreign Security Policy, and I chair the Foreign Affairs Council, which means the 28 ministers of the 28 member states. And I also am the head of the European Defence Agency. And this, in principle, sounds coherent. The point is that when you come to foreign policy, to foreign and security policy, you very soon realize that there's a lot of things that are not called foreign policy, but are part of a foreign policy strategy. Trade, as you mentioned very rightly, but also climate, energy, migration, development and cooperation, crisis management. And if you look at all different portfolios, it's difficult to identify one of the portfolios of the commissioners that does not have an external impact, because in the world of today, all internal policies do actually have an external influence, and vice versa. Everything that happens in the world, economy is the perfect example, has an influence on the internal policies, also politics sometimes. So what we decided to do is to, in this case, have a group of commissioners, including the one on trade, Cecilia Malmström, but also including the one on neighborhood and enlargement, the one on aid, the one on crisis management, and also adding some of the others. For instance, we had the first meeting together with the climate commissioner and the energy, and we're going to have others with others, to make sure, try to make sure that our policies are going in the same direction, and our instruments that stay in different buildings physically and in different directorates and in different offices are at least coordinated so that they can work together, or we can use them together for the same political purpose. When it comes to trade, one of the, I would say probably, two biggest challenges that we have. On one side, the overall multilateral system for trade. This is true for trade, but this is true also for other multilateral instruments that we have. Europe, I think, could do a lot to make sure that multilateral forum work effectively. And this is one of the biggest problems of our time. We have a world that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after 25 years, what is your average age? 20, 23? Yeah, something like that? So before you were born. And still over your lifetime, we expected to have a world more in peace and a new world order. And we have a world that, well, it's not definitely in peace and not even in order. So probably it's time that we use the next, hopefully not 25 years, but at least 5, 6 years to contribute, to do our part, to shape an effective multilateralism. And this comes also to the European, to the economic field and the trade. Second, more specific issue that we will have on the table on trade is the acronym is TTIP. You might have heard of it if you study economy for sure. The Transatlantic Trade Agreement, which is, I believe, not only a trade agreement, but also a political tool. We have strong ties with the US as Europeans. That's out of history, that's out of common values, that's out of being part of a strategic political and military alliance, NATO. I think that if we fail in reaching a good agreement also on trade among Europeans and Americans, that would definitely be not a sign of maturity from both our side and probably also the other side of the Atlantic. So this is the thing on which we will be working the most in the coming months. It is going to be challenging because both in the European Union and in the United States, the mood not necessarily goes in that direction. But I think that it can bring a lot of economic good results and also relaunch politically a relationship that cannot be just based on history and the past, but needs to find new roots and new perspectives for the future.
Thank you. And there's the next question.
Hello, my name is Riga. I'm a student, PhD of political sciences here at this faculty, and also at the same time Latvian diplomats dealing with CSDP. That's part of your portfolio. So basically I have one question. A month ago, in written comments to European Parliament, you mentioned that you would be in favor of possibly reviewing European security strategy. But last year, 4 think tanks, including Italian one, they designed this report on European global strategy that goes much more beyond just security strategy. It goes for, let's say, European foreign policy strategy. So my question is whether you would be in favor of just reviewing the European security strategy or be more ambitious and go for the very first European foreign policy strategy. And in such regard, what role for the EU and NATO relations? Do you have any specific suggestions already in your mind that you could probably elaborate on and discuss with us? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I was discussing that yesterday in Brussels with many different people. You would guess probably that I would go for the most ambitious one. I think that, well, first of all, our security strategy is of 2003. Today we were just reminding that it states that Europe has never been so much in peace as it is now, it states. Obviously, in 2003, that was true. In 2014 or 2015, that is not the case anymore. And the security environment has changed dramatically. Not only, but Europe has changed dramatically for better, and has instruments, but I guess you know better than me, has instruments in the security field that didn't have in 2003. We have technically capacities and capabilities that we didn't have and that we didn't even think it was possible for Europe to have. And this answers part of the question on NATO, because on one side we have 22 out of 28 member states that are the same. On both sides it's 28 and 22, it's the common ones. We share values, we share concerns, we share threats, for sure. The European Union can relate better with NATO and coordinate better with NATO. I would say there is a complementarity that could be quite natural if we structure it, if we organize it, if we start a dialogue that is not just sharing information, but what can we do together in full respect of the autonomy and the specificity of both of us. And I think there is a space for doing that in the coming years, because there is the need for doing that and the interest for doing that in the coming years. But your question is very interesting, because it points out the basic dilemma, which is security just security, or is also other parts of foreign policy related to security? And I think that is the key conceptual challenge we have in front of us. Normally in Europe, if you ask someone, I guess it's here, as it is in England or in Greece or in Finland, security, the first answer anybody would give you is related to military. That is the immediate association that normally we do. But actually, if we look at security in terms of the everyday life and also the life of the states and of the organizations, that is related also to many other things. It's related for sure to economy, it's related to energy, and it is related to climate change. The first time I heard, it was many years ago, in the US, someone saying that the first national security threat for the US could be climate change. To me, Italian sounded, and still I'm Italian, so climate change would affect quite dramatically the coast of the country. In Europe, I should say the country I know best. This is something I tell you. Once we get to Brussels, we're not Italians or French or Latvians, we are all Europeans, and that's good. But the usual way in which we refer to our countries is not my country, is the country I know best, which is something that might sound a little bit strange, but I just wanted to share it with you. But yes, there is, I think, a growing awareness of the fact that there are different dimensions of security. And that we have different tools for security, not all related to the military one. And on the other side, the military tools that we have are good and useful and interesting for strictly security issues, but also for humanitarian work or other kind of dimensions. Think of research and industry, for instance. So the interconnection between the two, security and foreign affairs, and foreign policy, is much stronger than I think we conceptually elaborate. And on the other side, the border that separates the two fields is weaker and weaker and more fragile. So yes, I think we need to review our security/foreign policy strategy. But even this, whether it's a security strategy or a foreign policy strategy, is probably going to be put on the table for a broad debate. Because what I'm interested in is not just drafting a paper. That could then be the new security strategy or the new foreign policy strategy. I think what we need is a large public opinion debate about these issues, and making sure that the security strategy or the foreign policy strategy that we work on reflects not just the work of few people closed in a room, but is the result of a collective exercise that includes universities, think tanks, also NGOs, and different political stakeholders inside Europe, and maybe also with some inputs from outside, knowing that what comes from the outside needs to be elaborated, needs to be read. But still, I think we need to have that kind of approach. Not just getting to the paper, but the process is probably going to be more interesting than the paper itself.
Right, thank you. And I believe we have 2 questions, so we'll proceed with this.
First of all, thank you for an interesting speech. As a student from Georgia, I would use this opportunity to ask you to talk more about Eastern Partnership and to share your personal attitude towards this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. But as you are a student from Georgia, I could also ask you to brief me about your country, because to me it's key. I mentioned it very briefly, I think, in my introduction, the fact that, sorry, we don't see each other. The fact that it's key not only to concentrate on what is happening in Ukraine, but also to guarantee that in the Eastern Partnership we have success stories. And Georgia and Moldova, in different ways, are going to be critical in this respect. And the elections coming up in Moldova, but also the political changes that are happening in your country, are interested for me to understand and to read in the appropriate and right way in order to guarantee that we have continue to have a very good cooperation. I'm going to chair the EU-Georgia Association Council meeting on Monday, and I'm sure I will have more elements there. I know, I don't know if I can say that, but I think so. I know that the Latvian Foreign Minister is going to visit soon Georgia, so I have also asked to exchange ideas about what is going to be the result of his visit. But as you didn't mention in particular my position on your country, but on Eastern Partnership, we have launched, we are going to launch a complete revision of the Eastern Partnership, of the European Partnership, because that is also a little bit, let's say, outdated. The region has changed in a way that was not foreseeable some years ago. And to me, the most relevant thing would be to try and understand, together with our partners, how we make sure that we find the appropriate means to support our bilateral relations and what is happening inside the countries, because every country is different from the other. You know that here much better than any other in Europe, but each country is different. And if we think that we can apply the same, even mental structures or instruments to our bilateral relations, European Union, Georgia, European Union, Moldova, or others, we do, I think, a big mistake. What I think is needed, but we will have, again, here, we will take the next, I would say, 7-8 months to do this process, to engage actors, different actors, not only state actors, in this dialogue, to understand each and every country, what are the best ways to go on, in which kind of reforms, with what kind of instruments, and making sure that our partnerships are not perceived anyway and anywhere as either a paternalizing instrument or a threat to the neighbors' neighbors. Because I think this is also our responsibility, to make sure that having closer links with the European Union is not an element that can cause internal divisions in countries or external tensions in the regions. And I think the best way of understanding how to do this is with the countries themselves that are not a user of the policy, are the players of the game, as much as we are, maybe even more than the European Union is. So this is a little bit the way forward, but I might take 5 minutes after we finish to get your ideas on what's happening in your country, if I can. Thanks.
Yeah, it seems that we had a rather slow beginning, but then the questions are starting to pop up towards the end. So I would suggest that we collect several questions on this part of the auditorium, and then we can proceed from there.
Hello, my name is Elza Akla, and I'm a master's diplomacy student in this faculty. As Professor Rostov's already mentioned, the biggest security concern for Latvia and the Baltic region right now is the situation in Ukraine. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see the possible involvement of the European Union if the crisis continues to escalate there? And maybe how do you see the possible solutions and how it's going to resolve? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Wilmers and I'm also a diplomacy student in this faculty, and my question is rather similar to the previous one. The current situation that I see is that the EU's policy towards Russia in respect to Ukraine is sort of a race against time. Will Russia cave in on economic sanctions before Ukraine's military forces kind of cannot hold back the supply of arms that Russia is providing to the rebels anymore? My belief that Ukraine's army cannot hold indefinitely, while Russia's political reach is longer, and they can't simply cave in on these economic sanctions. So the result of this conflict, as I see, is whether either there's going to be a frozen conflict, or Russia will somehow reach its strategic goals, whether it be only Donetsk and Luhansk or also Mariupolis. But the question is this: if this is a frozen conflict, how could EU use it to its advantage, and how could the EU try to stop Russia from kind of reaching these strategic goals it has in the region?
Vilmar, could you pass the microphone to your right?
Hello, my name is Evgeny. I'm an exchange student from Bulgaria. I study political science. My question is regarding the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. What is the position of the European Commission towards the situation in Iraq and in Syria? Are you planning, because a few weeks ago Recep Erdogan was here and he said that ground invasion is what has to happen. So he supports ground invasion. The UK and USA are already conducting airstrikes, so what should we expect? Because if the Baltics are concerned about Russia, we are very close to this military conflict. There are 5 sides there: the Iraqi government, Bashar Assad government, the Free Syrian Army, the Kurds, and the Islamic State. So I really want to hear what your view, because I sense that in some ways the European Union is a little bit passive on this question. So, yeah.
Good. Ukraine. I was surprised that that question was not coming up before. I think the European Union role in this, that you described very well, a little bit a race against time, the big risk that we get to a frozen conflict, and at the same time the reality of a conflict without frozen, just conflict. And on top of that, an internal situation in Ukraine that risks to be and to get even more complicated as the energy, now we reached an agreement on gas, but still the energy sector, the economic sector is suffering quite a lot. And we might have political and social tensions out of a transition that is not easy in itself. Imagine how it, well, you know that, but how difficult it is on top of a conflict or a crisis on their own territory. So the role that the European Union could have in this, I think, is based on 3 elements. And the mix of the 3 elements, the balance that we will find through a discussion and a decision that we will have to take all together. Because to me, priority number 1 is keeping the unity of the European Union, because this is part of the mix that can work, not to split and staying united. Is a mix of 3 things. The economic pressure, as we all say that we don't see and we don't want to see a military escalation in that concern. We all say, both in European Union and in NATO, all the 28 on both sides, European Union and NATO, that the solution to the crisis is not and cannot and should not get to the military. The pressure through economic sanctions that do work economically. The economy in Russia is getting much worse and is affecting, the situation is affecting, I think, not only the circle of businesses, but also starting to be clear to the population in Russia. The second element of our role, of our strategy, is keeping the a political channel open. Because if you put pressure, you also have to be clear that the pressure is put in order to reach a political agreement. Otherwise, the pressure is just for the sake of pressure and doesn't lead anywhere. On the other side, keeping the political track open without putting pressure, it's difficult to imagine that you reach any kind of result. But if you study diplomacy, you know that better than me. And the third element of the strategy is something I touched upon already, is the support to Ukraine and to Ukrainian people. I say that as an element of the strategy to try and solve the crisis, because this could prevent the crisis to get worse and can also exercise a sort of attraction element. You know, this famous soft power that Europe has, and that I guess here is quite easy to feel, has been quite easy to feel before you were born, on the fact that if we manage to support a successful transition in Ukraine, this could have a more powerful effect than the political or the economic track. I strongly believe that making success stories linked to the will of peoples and governments to relate more and more to the European Union is going to be a crucial part of building a safer environment. The other thing we have to do is, I believe, stressing the fact that the European Union is not and has not to be perceived as against anyone. We have managed in the past years, both in the European Union but also in NATO, with many difficulties and many limits that I don't want to underestimate, but still to work in a cooperative mode with many different partners. I'm not talking only of Russia now, but also of many others. And the core message of the European Union is this, that out of sharing a common vision or a common interest sometimes, you can find, even if you're very different and you have different perspectives and different habits and different standards, you can find even limited fields of cooperation. And that can lead you to further positive steps. I know it is, in these times, probably the most difficult message to pass, both internally and externally. But still, if we lose sight of this horizon that is deep in our DNA, we easily go towards scenarios that are not the ones that our people not only want, but probably believe that are at the very same roots of our identity and of our being together. I hope this answers your question, and about, for sure it answers the question, the previous question about the EU role. I don't know if it answers the questions about possible solutions. You asked that. It's the most difficult question, because you can make an analysis, you can develop a strategy, you can make sure that you build a political consensus around this strategy, and you try to be coherent and consistent and credible in applying that strategy. Whether this brings results, it's not always all in your hands. Behaviors on all sides are not always rational, and this is also part of history and of reality. What is going to happen, or what is going to be the solution, if I knew, my job would have been easier. But what I am sure about is that there can be a solution, and that the European Union as such, also building on many expertise, can contribute to solving the problem. It will not be easy, it will not be fast. I know that very well. But if you, in this job, if you lose hope, then you'd better change job. And that, I guess, is the same for studying diplomacy, and so get ready for difficult times. On ISIL and Syria and Iraq, you're completely right about the complexity of the situation. Where are you? I don't see. Yeah, you are. Of the complexity of the situation, and the 5 actors, and the non-black and white situation there. And that is exactly the reason why I think there's a certain being very cautious from the international community on how to handle this whole thing. You're also right in saying that there are different agendas within a broader coalition that I would rather call partnership rather than coalition, because a coalition identifies the work purely on the military side, while we have shared views on how to face ISIL and solve the complexity, or face the complexity of the situation in Syria and Iraq, but mainly in Syria, knowing that the military part is only one of the aspects, probably the most urgent one when it comes to saving lives. But then, in order to find the real solution, you also have to have the political track, and this is the most difficult one to find in these days, and I'll come back to that. You also need to have the humanitarian approach, which is also urgent and sometimes linked to the security aspect, because bringing in aid is definitely not the easiest thing in the world. And you need to have also, I would say, the cultural message right, the narrative about this, about the complexity. It's not a way of not answering the question. I will come back to the military and to the political side, but let me underline one thing. What is happening there is not the West against Islam. I believe that it would be very good if this work that is difficult and complicated and complex was not a Western-led effort, but an Arab-led effort. And on the military side, you see it quite well, because there's a lot of engagement and commitment by some of the Arab countries. And passing in Europe and in the West, but Europe has a particular understanding of complexity that gives us a special responsibility. Passing the right narrative about the fact that here the first victims of the situation are Muslims can sound something sophisticated in the middle of the crisis, of a conflict, of a war, but is important in order not to feed further conflicts and wars. And to draw a line very clear on the fact that what is happening now is completely new in geography and in history. And that there is not a coming back of previous experiences, and that what is happening there is not the same that is happening in other parts of the world. But on the military and on the political side, and on the European role in this, the European Union as such, as from the very beginning, actually from August, well, not the beginning of the Syrian crisis, but of this new part of the crisis, has tried to coordinate the political, the military, and also the humanitarian efforts of the member states. I remember at that time I was an Italian foreign minister. There was a lot of discussions about the fact that we asked to convene a Foreign Affairs Council on the 15th of August. That was a critical time in terms of having all the offices closed. But it was important that we started coordinating the military efforts of the different member states in terms of ammunition, in terms of training, in terms of different kind of interventions of the member states, and in terms of humanitarian aid. Plus, the political part of it. And it is my intention to work in depth in the coming weeks with the 28 foreign ministers to see what kind of role the European Union can play in a more active way to see if we manage to relaunch some sort of political process to solve the situation in Syria. Because we know very well that you can do the military part, you can do the humanitarian part, you can do the cultural part, but if you do not solve the political solution, the political track in Syria, you will not solve any of the 5 different elements you mentioned that are all interconnected. I think in this respect, the work that the UN Secretary General, new Special Envoy, has started to do, Staffan de Mistura, half Swedish, half Italian, so probably capable of understanding complexity, is trying to do with different talks with different actors in the region and inside Syria, could be helpful to identify the way forward. Because after Geneva I and Geneva II, we are stuck on the political track, on the political level. And what we need to do is to refine a way of having a political perspective for solving the crisis in Syria. This is, I think, something on which the European Union could work as European Union, and coordinating the efforts that member states do on the military side, on the cultural message, making sure that we all send the same kind of message, and on the humanitarian level. On the humanitarian level, the European Union does something also in itself, obviously, especially in Jordan and in Lebanon, and also in Turkey. But I think that that would be one of probably the most complicated and also, not only difficult politically, but also difficult from a human point of view, emotional, because it's now almost 4 years we are facing a war in Syria. And the biggest risk when you have something like this is that you just get used to the fact that there is a war. And you just overcome the need for solving it. My impression is that with the help of many Arab countries, we can possibly not only find a solution to that, but also take the chance of this crisis to move a little bit the framework in the region. The fact that different actors perceive a common threat that was not there before could make them think that there is an added value in talking to each other and coordinating, and that this could be a game changer for the whole region of the Middle East. Thank you.
Dear friends and colleagues, I'm sure we would have more questions and we could debate them for hours, but the problem is that we're heavily behind the schedule. So thank you for coming to the Faculty of Social Sciences and sharing your insights with us. And we hope to see you in this faculty again at some point. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much.